I am a 33-year-old woman who has been estranged from my parents for the past 3 years. This estrangement wasn't a sudden decision, but the culmination of years of complex family dynamics, deeply rooted in favoritism and cultural expectations. The immediate catalyst for cutting ties was an incident involving my younger brother, now 30, who deliberately sabotaged my business venture. He convinced our parents to withdraw their investment at the very last minute, leaving me stranded without the financial support I was counting on after I had already quit my stable job. This betrayal not only jeopardized my professional aspirations, but also brought to the surface a lifetime of resentment and hurt. To provide some context, my relationship with my brother has always been fraught with tension and animosity. It's not just about this one incident, it's a culmination of a lifetime of being overshadowed and undervalued. Growing up, I was acutely aware that my parents favored him over me, and this favoritism was not subtle, it was blatant and pervasive. He was the golden child, basking in their undivided attention and affection, while I was often relegated to the background. Our parents are immigrants who come from a culture where men are highly revered, almost treated like kings, and women are expected to conform to traditional roles centered around household duties, marriage, and child-rearing. This cultural backdrop set the stage for the inequality that defined our family life. From a young age, it was clear that my parents had wanted a son as their firstborn. My arrival was met with disappointment that they never explicitly stated, but made evident through their actions and attitudes. While they weren't overtly cruel to me, the bias was evident in countless subtle and not so subtle ways. My achievements were often overlooked or downplayed, while my brother's accomplishments, no matter how minor, were celebrated with great enthusiasm. They didn't even attempt to treat us equally or pretend that we were valued the same. My brother was well aware of the preferential treatment he received and exploited it shamelessly. He had a knack for manipulating situations to his advantage, ensuring that he remained the center of attention. Whenever I achieved something noteworthy, he would find a way to overshadow it, making every day about him. One particularly hurtful example was on my 18th birthday. It was supposed to be a milestone celebration for me, a day where I could bask in the love and support of family and friends as I stepped into adulthood. Instead, my brother decided to announce to everyone at the party that he was dating a college senior and planned to drop out of high school to live with her. This bombshell sent our parents into a frenzy of panic and embarrassment, effectively hijacking my special day. The atmosphere shifted entirely, and my achievements and celebration were completely overshadowed by his fabricated drama. Later, it turned out that none of his announcement was true. He had concocted the entire story solely to steal the spotlight. These kinds of manipulative antics were not isolated incidents, but part of a consistent pattern throughout our lives. My brother thrived on attention, and would go to great lengths to ensure he remained the focal point of the family. His actions were not just typical sibling rivalry, they were calculated moves designed to undermine me and reinforce his favored status. I despised him for it, and that resentment only deepened over the years. When it came time for me to leave for college, I saw it as an opportunity to escape the toxic environment that had stifled me for so long. I moved out and didn't look back, returning home only when absolutely necessary. My absence didn't seem to affect my parents much. They had their golden child at home, and that was all that mattered to them. The disparity in how we were treated was glaringly obvious even in our departures. My farewell was a modest family gathering with a few friends, while my brother's send-off was an extravagant affair. They rented out a restaurant, invited everyone they knew, and celebrated him with the kind of fanfare that I could only dream of. I understood early on that once I reached adulthood, I would be on my own. My parents had no intention of supporting me financially beyond what was absolutely necessary. The only reason they agreed to pay for my college education was that they could afford it without much inconvenience due to my father's wealth. To them, investing in my education was a waste, as they believed my primary purpose was to marry and start a family. I had to plead with them to allow me to attend college, promising eternal gratitude in return. I suspect they agreed partly because it allowed them to maintain some control over me, ensuring I remained indebted to them. During my time at college, I excelled academically, graduating from business school with top honors. Securing a well-paying job was relatively easy given my qualifications and dedication. When I informed my parents that I intended to repay them for my college expenses, they were disappointed. They had expected me to follow the traditional path, they had envisioned, finding a suitable husband immediately after graduation, and settling down to start a family. My mother was particularly vocal about her disapproval, insisting that pursuing a career would make me less desirable in the marriage market. She believed that men would be intimidated by a successful, independent woman, and thus, I was jeopardizing my chances of finding a husband. Their narrow-minded views were frustrating, but not surprising. They clung tightly to outdated cultural norms, refusing to acknowledge that times were changing. I tried to explain that personal independence was important to me and that societal expectations were evolving. Women were no longer confined to domestic roles, and I wanted to carve out my own path. This reasoning fell on deaf ears. They were furious with me for weeks, but when they realized their disapproval wouldn't sway me, they begrudgingly resumed a semblance of normalcy in our interactions. I began repaying them for my education, living frugally and working diligently to settle the debt as quickly as possible. Once I had repaid them in full, I felt a significant weight lift off my shoulders. With no financial obligations tying me to them, I saw little reason to maintain regular contact. Being around them was suffocating, as they constantly pressured me to abandon my career ambitions in favor of marriage. Moreover, they never missed an opportunity to boast about my brother's so-called achievements, despite his lackluster performance and reliance on our father's connections for employment. He had graduated from business school as well, but was nowhere near as accomplished as I was. Yet, they lauded him endlessly while disregarding my successes. The only reason I had maintained any semblance of a relationship with them was out of a sense of duty while I owed them money. With that chapter closed, I allowed the relationship to wane. They didn't seem to mind much, after all. They had their preferred child to focus on. A few years later, a colleague and I decided to channel our passion and skills into starting our own business. We spent countless hours brainstorming, planning, and refining our ideas. Recognizing my father's business acumen, I considered approaching my parents for investment, not as their daughter seeking a favor, but as a serious entrepreneur presenting a viable opportunity. Despite our strained relationship, I believed that they might recognize the potential in our venture. We meticulously prepared our business plan, ensuring every detail was accounted for. Presenting it to my parents was nerve-wracking, but to my surprise, they were impressed. They treated the proposal with professionalism, expressing genuine interest in investing. It seemed like a breakthrough moment, a chance to bridge the gap and perhaps rebuild some semblance of a relationship based on mutual respect. However, their agreement was only verbal, pending further due diligence and the completion of more tangible milestones. For months, my partner and I worked tirelessly, balancing our full-time jobs with the demands of launching a startup. We aimed to impress my parents, believing that securing their investment would be the linchpin for our business's success. When we had completed about 75% of the groundwork, my father indicated that he was ready to proceed with the paperwork. Elated, my partner and I submitted our resignations, eager to dedicate ourselves fully to the venture. We believed we were on the cusp of turning our dreams into reality. But just days later, everything came crashing down. My parents called me back to their house to inform me that they had decided against investing. The abrupt reversal was like a punch to the gut. Confused and desperate for answers, I pressed them for an explanation. After much prodding, they revealed that my brother had advised them to withdraw, claiming our business was destined to fail. I was stunned. My brother had shown no prior interest in our venture, yet his word was enough to undermine months of hard work and planning. It became clear that he had deliberately orchestrated this betrayal, waiting until we were fully committed to sabotage us. His actions were a calculated attempt to derail my ambitions and leave me in a precarious position. Anger and hurt overwhelmed me. I confronted my parents, expressing my disbelief that they would so readily dismiss my efforts, based solely on my brother's unfounded opinions. Their response was dismissive. They stood by their decision without remorse, emphasizing their trust in my brother's judgment over mine. Feeling betrayed and devastated, I left their house in a fury, severing ties completely. I returned to my partner, who was understanding and supportive. He suggested we might be able to retract our resignations and return to our previous jobs, but I was determined not to let my brother's machinations dictate my path. I refused to give up on our dream. We redoubled our efforts, seeking alternative investors with a renewed sense of purpose. It was an uphill battle. We faced skepticism and rejection, but we persevered. Eventually, we secured the necessary funding from investors who believed in our vision as much as we did. The initial months after launching were grueling. We worked around the clock, facing challenges we hadn't anticipated. Sleepless nights became the norm, and the pressure was immense. Yet, our dedication paid off. We broke even within a few months, and our business began to gain traction. The success was exhilarating, not just financially but emotionally. It was a vindication of our hard work and proof that we didn't need my family's support to succeed. Years passed without any contact from my parents or brother. I focused on growing the business and building a life that brought me fulfillment. I surrounded myself with supportive friends and colleagues who appreciated me for who I was, free from the toxic dynamics of my family. Then, out of the blue, my parents showed up at my doorstep. It had been almost 3 years since our last interaction. A part of me foolishly hoped they were there to reconcile, perhaps even to apologize for the past. I invited them in, trying to mask my apprehension. However, their visit wasn't about mending fences. They had heard about my business's success and wanted to invest. Their sudden interest was purely self-serving, an attempt to benefit from the prosperity they had once dismissed. They didn't bother with pleasantries or inquiries about my well-being. They got straight to the point. I was incredulous. After everything that had happened, they expected me to welcome them back with open arms. I couldn't help but laugh at the audacity. I told them in no uncertain terms that their offer was not only unwelcome but insulting. My father reacted with anger, insisting that I owed him respect and consideration as my parent. My mother began to cry, lamenting that allowing me to pursue higher education had led to my defiance and independence. Their behavior was a stark reminder that they hadn't changed. They still viewed me through the lens of their traditional expectations, unable to accept that I had forged my own path. They saw my success as a threat to their authority and a challenge to cultural norms they held dear. As they began to argue and hurl accusations, I asked them to leave. When they refused, I was left with no choice but to physically escort them out of my apartment. It was a distressing and surreal experience, but I felt a sense of empowerment in standing my ground. Later, my brother contacted me, furious and threatening legal action for allegedly harming our parents. He demanded an apology, accusing me of disrespect and ingratitude. His call only solidified my decision to cut ties entirely. Engaging with them further would only invite more toxicity into my life. In the days that followed, I faced a barrage of negativity from extended family members. They launched a smear campaign, criticizing me for my actions and siding with my parents. It was disheartening, but I refused to let it derail me. I leaned on my support network, including my business partner and close friends, who reminded me of how far I'd come. I decided to focus on what truly mattered, my happiness and the continued success of my business. I channeled my energy into expanding our operations, exploring new markets, and giving back to the community through philanthropic efforts. Each milestone was a testament to my resilience and determination. On a personal level, I found fulfillment in relationships that uplifted me. I began dating a wonderful man who appreciated me for who I am. Our relationship blossomed, and we began discussing plans for the future, including marriage. The idea of starting a family of my own, built on mutual respect and love, filled me with joy. Reflecting on my journey, I realized that cutting ties with my family, while painful, was necessary for my well-being. Their inability to accept me as an independent individual capable of making her own choices meant that any relationship would be fraught with conflict and disappointment. I chose to surround myself with people who celebrated my successes and supported my ambitions. As for my brother, I learned through mutual acquaintances that he remained stagnant in his career, still working under our father's shadow. With the recent acquisition of my father's company, his future there was uncertain. I couldn't help but feel a sense of poetic justice. His attempts to sabotage me had failed, and he was now facing the consequences of his own choices. In the end, I found peace in embracing the life I had built on my own terms. My family's absence was not a loss, but a liberation from the constraints and negativity that had once held me back. I continued to grow, both personally and professionally, unencumbered by their expectations. My story is one of resilience, empowerment, and the pursuit of happiness despite adversity. It's a testament to the strength that comes from believing in oneself and the importance of forging one's own path. While I can't change the past or my family's actions, I can choose how I respond and move forward. As I plan my future with my partner, including the possibility of marriage, I do so with the knowledge that I am loved and valued for who I am. My wedding will be a celebration of love and the life I've created, shared with those who truly care for me. My parents and brother will not be invited, not out of spite, but because they no longer hold a place in the narrative of my life. In closing, I acknowledge that family dynamics can be incredibly complex and painful. However, it's possible to break free from toxic relationships and build a fulfilling life. I hope that sharing my story might inspire others facing similar challenges to find the strength within themselves to pursue their own happiness.